The Aviary of Whispers. The house didn't want me there. I could feel it in the geometry of the place. The hallways of Blackwood Manor were too long, and the angles of the ceiling sloped downward like a brow furrowed in anger. I was an archivist, hired to catalog the estate of a recluse who had died screaming, but for 3 days I had done nothing but cough on dust that tasted like copper and old skin. It was on the 4th day, during a thunderstorm that battered the slate roof like a deluge of stones, that I found the false panel in the attic. Behind the rotting wood lay a small, windowless chamber where the air was freezing, not the chill of winter, but the deep, unnatural cold of a meat locker. Sitting in the center of the floor, illuminated only by the erratic flashes of lightning through the cracks in the wall, was the abject, a birdcage. But as I drew closer, my flashlight beam trembling, I realized the craftsmanship was hideous. The bars were not iron or brass, they were bone, polished white and curved, looking disturbingly like human ribs elongated and fused together at the top, while the base was a slab of dark, heavy slate. Inside, there was no perch for a bird. There was only a small cup made of cracked porcelain, stained with a reddish-brown residue, and a piece of parchment that looked more like cured leather. I picked up the parchment, and the handwriting was spidery, erratic, the ink shimmering with a fairish sheen. It read, "The aviary does not hold birds, it holds time. To hear the past, feed it a regret. To see the present, feed it a breath. To know the future, feed it a silence." I should have left right then, my instincts honed by years of handling cursed heirlooms and occult oddities screamed at me to run, but the silence of the house was heavy, and I was a man hollowed out by a life of solitude, so curiosity became a hook that had already snagged my cheek, and I took the cage downstairs. I placed the cage on the heavy oak table in the library, where under the warm glow of the electric lamps, the bone bars seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, looking moist as if the marrow inside was still fluid. I sat before it with a glass of whiskey in my hand while the storm raged outside, and pondered the first instruction. To hear the past, feed it a regret. We all carry regrets, but mine was a physical weight I wore on my finger. I looked at the silver band, which was my brother's ring, the brother I had promised to watch over, the brother who had drowned in a quarry while I was too busy flirting with a girl on the bank to notice he hadn't surfaced. 20 years of silence and 20 years of waking up to the sound of water in my ears drove me to slide the ring off with shaking fingers. It felt heavy, charged with the memory of that day, and I reached through the bone ribs and dropped the silver band into the porcelain cup. It didn't clink. It sizzled like meat hitting a hot pan, and a plume of gray smoke spiraled up from the cup, smelling of pond water and rotting algae, before the library disappeared entirely. I was no longer in the chair. I was underwater. The pressure crushed my chest, and the liquid was murky green and freezing. I thrashed with my lungs burning and bubbles tearing from my lips until through the silt, I saw him. My brother was there, not a child anymore, but bloated with his skin gray and peeling, floating, suspended in the dark water with eyes open, white and cloudy, staring directly at me. Then his mouth opened, and the water didn't rush in. A voice rushed out, clear and dry and terrified, saying, "Elias, why are you just watching? Elias, the water is so heavy. Grab my hand. Please, grab my hand." I reached out, screaming into the void, my hand passing through the murky water to grab him, but my fingers met only cold, hard bone, and I gasped violently, jolting back into the library, clutching the bars of the cage so hard my palms were bleeding. The room was silent, and the ring was gone from the cup, but the room had changed. There were wet, muddy footprints on the carpet leading from the cage to where I sat, and the smell of pond water was so thick I gagged, proving it wasn't just a recording. The cage had brought the ghost of that moment into the room to feed, and in return it had hurt me. 2 days passed and I didn't sleep, because every time I closed my eyes I saw the water, and the cage was changing. The white bone bars were turning pink as tiny capillaries webbed across the surface, pulsing with a faint rhythmic throb. The house felt smaller, and the shadows stretched out from the corners of the room, pointing like accusing fingers toward the aviary. I felt watched, not by the house, but by something new, a pressure on the back of my neck and a cold draft that followed me from room to room. I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to see. So on the third night, I stood before the cage, which looked bloated now, with ribs slightly wider as if it had inhaled, and I whispered, "A breath." I leaned down, placing my lips close to the gaps between the bone bars, and exhaled a long, steady stream of air into the empty space. And the reaction was instantaneous and violent. The cage didn't just accept the air, it sucked it. A vacuum formed, sealing my mouth to the bars, and I tried to pull back, panic flaring, but the suction was immense. It felt like my lungs were being turned inside out, and my very essence was being siphoned into the porcelain cup. Just as I thought I would pass out, the cage released me, and I stumbled back, falling against the bookshelf. My vision blurred, then snapped into a terrifying hyperclarity where the walls of the library became translucent, like shifting gauze. I could see the studs, the wiring, the rats scurrying in the insulation. I looked down through the floorboards and saw the basement where the boiler rusted in the dark. Then I looked at myself, or rather where I had been standing. Through this new terrible sight, I saw the library as it truly was, and I realized I wasn't alone. Standing directly behind where I had been sitting was a figure 7 feet tall, composed of tattered gray rags that defied gravity, floating as if underwater. It had no face, only a smooth, pale surface where a visage should be, and its arms were impossibly long, reaching down with fingers hovering inches from my neck, feeding on wisps of golden light that drifted from my shoulders into its faceless head. I spun around to confront it, but with my naked eyes the room was empty, yet when I looked back through the lens of the vision provided by the cage, there it was, the gray man turning its smooth head slowly to look at me. It knew I could see it. The vision shattered, leaving me panting and sweat-drenched in an apparently empty room, but I felt the cold spot behind me and the fingers hovering near my spine, realizing the cage hadn't just shown me the present. It had shown me that I was merely cattle. I boarded up the windows and pushed heavy furniture against the doors, irrational since the gray man was already inside, but terror makes you do foolish things, and I could feel my vitality draining as my hands shook and my skin turned waxy gray. The thing was eating me slowly, savoring the meal, and I had one option left, the final variation. To know the future, feed it a silence. If I knew the future, I could change it. I could find a way to escape the house and the parasite attached to my soul, so I approached the cage, which was unrecognizable now, the bone bars covered in a thin layer of translucent meat and the porcelain cup beating with a steady, wet rhythm. I held a letter opener in my hand and whispered, "Silence." Knowing it didn't want to pause on the quiet of a library, it wanted the silence of the grave, the things that could never be said. I opened my mouth, but instead of cutting my tongue out, I focused on the one thing I had never told anyone, the secret that sat in the center of my soul like a black tumor, the truth about my brother, which was that I hadn't just been flirting. I had seen him go under. I had seen him struggle. And for one brief, terrible second, I had waited because I wanted to be the only son. I wrote the confession on a slip of paper with jagged handwriting, then burned it in the ashtray and scraped the black ash into the pulsing cup, offering the ash of a secret kept for a lifetime, the ultimate silence. The cage stopped pulsing, and the room went pitch black. The sound of the storm vanished. The sound of my own heartbeat vanished. And then the bars of the cage began to crack, snapping open like a rib cage during surgery. A light poured out of the cage, not a holy light, but a sickly biological luminescence, and I leaned forward, desperate to see the future, to see my escape, but the light engulfed me, and instead of a vision, I felt a pull, a hooked chain dragging my navel. "Show me," I screamed, "show me how I survive."
But the voice of the cage spoke then, and it wasn't Sarah's voice or my brother's. It was a chorus of 1,000 cracking bones whispering, "There is no future outside. There is only the preservation." The light solidified, wrapping around my wrists and ankles. It wasn't light anymore, it was bone, and I tried to pull away, but my feet were fused to the floor. I looked down and saw my shoes were gone. My skin was calcifying, turning white and hard, merging with the oak of the table and the slate base of the cage. I wasn't looking at the future, I was becoming it. My ribs expanded, bursting through my shirt, stretching and elongating, curling upward to grow out of my chest, arching over my head to form a dome, while my arms withered, pulling into my torso, and my legs dissolved into the base. I tried to scream, but my jaw fused shut, and my tongue hardened into porcelain. And the gray man stepped out of the shadows, not a monster, but the keeper.
Walking up to the cage that I had become, he reached inside my ribs, which were now the bars, and gently stroked the porcelain cup that was once my heart, before placing a velvet cloth over me. Time is irrelevant now. I exist in a state of suspended agony as the structure, the trap, sitting in the dark for what feels like a century, feeling the dust settle on the velvet that covers my bones. But today, the door opened. I heard the creak of hinges and the hesitant footsteps of sneakers on wood, followed by the breathing of someone young and curious. "Whoa," a voice says, a young man. "Check this out. Hidden room?" And the footsteps get closer while I scream silently, rattling my bars in my mind, trying to warn him that the gray man is watching and waiting for him to start the ritual. But I am silence. I am the future, and the velvet cloth is whipped away so the light hits my white polished ribs. "It's a bird cage," the boy says. "Weird. Look, there's a note." And he picks up the parchment that sits inside me, the ghost of my own handwriting burning into his retinas as he reads it aloud. "To hear the past, feed it a regret." He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a locket. I can feel the grief coming off him in waves, and I beg him not to. I beg him to run, but he drops the locket into me. I have no choice. I am the aviary, and I must feed.